What's up, guys? As you can tell by the title of the video, we're going to be talking about Hunter x Hunter and why it's just about the worst piece of trash I've ever seen and probably ever will see. No, it's a good anime. It's a great anime, really, and I wouldn't even be making a video on it if I didn't think it was worthy of discussion. If you haven't seen it or read it, first of all, and second, stop watching here because there are definitely going to be major spoilers and you're going to have no fucking idea what I'm talking about. Go watch the anime, form your own opinions on it, and then meet me back here. One of the main reasons I'm making this video is because whenever I see any discussion on forums or on 4chan or on Reddit or any of the anime analysis and review videos that I constantly lurk, I'm a professional lurker, I rarely see any serious critiques about the anime. All I ever usually find are videos like, why Hunter x Hunter is the greatest of all time, Hunter x Hunter is the greatest shonen ever, why Hunter x Hunter kicks ass, and I agree that it's great, but any series that can possibly contend for being one of the greatest of all time, being a GOAT, should be thoroughly critiqued. And since I know I'm not the only one who sees some problems with the series, I wanted to promote some healthy discussion in the community by presenting some different viewpoints and opinions. Now I'm going to try to keep this organized, we'll see how successful I am with that, and I don't intend to make this a review of the entire series. I'm going to be focusing in on characters, storytelling techniques, and specific elements that I had problems with and that I think really hold the series back. And before I even start, I'm not going to talk about Takashi's infamous hiatuses. I know he goes on these huge hiatuses and people say he's got back problems or he's playing video games all the time instead of working, but none of that really matters to me as far as the story he's presented so far. So a little while ago I was having this discussion with a friend of mine about who some of our favorite anime characters and protagonists are, and why we like them. We ended up talking about how some of them are really complex, multifaceted, and have a lot of depth right from the start of their stories. And others are really basic and simple, but over the course of their stories they grow and change from their experiences. This growth takes place over what is known as a character arc. Over this arc, as a result of the hardships, experiences, and influence of other characters, you're able to see a notable difference from who they were at the start of the story to who they become at the end. This type of growth would be important in a longer 148 episode adventure series like Hunter x Hunter to prevent the feeling of stagnation and help engender some empathy for these characters. Dynamic characters complement a dynamic story and makes you feel like you've been on the journey along with them. This, however, isn't always essential, and some characters don't necessarily need to change significantly as their stories go on. In this case, a good character can still be likable and interesting if they have some complexity to them. A complex character is more relatable because human beings themselves are inherently very complex. But when characters don't grow and change, and they also aren't very complex, the opposite effect happens. Not only are they not relatable, but you begin to feel bored with a character, and their behavior becomes predictable, stale, and worst of all, it isn't entertaining. As far as the character of Gon is concerned, he pretty much grows up in a forest without his father and is raised by his aunt Mito. He's frequently depicted as being closer in nature to a feral beast than to a 12-year-old human child. This is emphasized through his almost animalistic physical characteristics. He naturally has very hyperbolic senses of smell, sight, and hearing, and is much stronger than an ordinary 12-year-old boy, even before he learns of Nen. And most importantly, he is a very instinctual and emotional being. Gon is impulsive, quick to anger, stubborn, and typically tries to force things to go his way. He's very prideful, and when this pride or his friends are threatened, he often tries to retaliate recklessly. The problem is, he pretty much remains the same as far as who he is as a character for the entire series. During the Heaven's Arena arc, Hisoka is decidedly much stronger than Gon, and this hurts his pride. This comes through in the fight where he is pretty obviously trying to prove himself. He even begins to argue with an officiator over the scoring, and this leads to his defeat. During the Hunter exam arc, Hanzo easily outclasses him, and everyone is aware of this but him. They all want him to quit so he doesn't die, but he refuses. Gon eventually has both of his arms broken and stubbornly pushes forward. Illumi's influence over Killua causes him to kill a contestant, forcing him to leave the Hunter exam. When Gon confronts him over this, he's quick to anger as usual and breaks Illumi's arm. During the Greed Island arc, the team concocts this whole plan to take down Genfru, which involves getting him to use his Hatsu ability. When he doesn't use it, Gon's pride is hurt, and he gets emotional and stubborn and deviates from the plan, eventually resulting in him getting his hand blown off. Now all of this comes to a head during the Chimera Ant arc. I'm going to be talking about this arc a lot because I really didn't enjoy it as much as I would have liked, and many of the problems I have with this series come from or come as a direct result of this arc. Gon meets Kite, a friend of his dad Jing, who he's met before, but as far as the anime is concerned, they don't yet have much of a relationship. Eventually Gon, Kite, and Killua get too close to the Chimera Ant nest, and Neferpito, one of the guards of the final boss of this arc, notices them and attacks. Kite gets injured, he loses an arm, and Kite yells at Killua and Gon and tells him to leave. He knows they aren't ready for her and there's no way they can win this fight. But as if on cue, Gon says, I know you're new around here, Kite, but that's not what the fuck I do. Time for me to get impulsive, angry, and reckless, and he starts to rage power up, but luckily Killua knocks him out because even he realizes it's just not the time for Gon's typical reckless bullshit. Eventually, we find out that Kite is essentially killed, but Gon doesn't become aware of this until a bit later. Killua and Gon do some training so they don't get shreked again, and eventually run into Neferpito healing Komugi, and I'll get into the importance of Komugi later, but again, Gon gets extremely emotional at what he sees. Neferpito, for him, is taking on this emblematic representation of all his rage and anger and regret behind what happened to Kite. He blames her, but he also blames himself for what happened, so it's hard for him to even wrap his head around seeing her healing someone after everything she did to Kite. This causes him to be completely overcome with this torrent of emotion, and he begins screaming at her and pounding his fists into the ground, and I think he's crying at this point, and eventually gives her 1 hour to finish up, and then she has to take Gon and Killua to Kite and heal him next. Now she knows there won't be any point to that, Kite's too far gone, but she's fiercely devoted to King Meruem and is doing whatever she can to uphold his wish of seeing Komugi healed. So she agrees and goes as far as breaking her own arm to prove that she means no harm. Eventually, Gon sees that Kite has been reduced to a reanimated zombie-like being and comes to realize that he is completely beyond saving and gone forever. Not really, but I'll get to that too. As he's coming to grips with this, Neferpito heals her arm and prepares to take down Gon and Killua. Gon, very clearly overcome with a myriad of emotion, so much so that he actually presents this uncharacteristically stoic and detached expression that's actually pretty spooky. And then it all finally crescendos with him using this vow ability and transforms into a much stronger adult version of himself. In this form, he pretty easily defeats Neferpito, thus saving himself and Killua from what otherwise would have been a sure death. Now, the main defense people go to when defending Gon's repetitive, stale, and frankly annoying behavior is that HunterxHunter is a deconstruction of the shonen genre. For those who don't know, a deconstruction, which has become a bit of a buzzword in the community at this point, breaks the genre down to its bare, most essential tropes and genre conventions, then takes them to their most logical conclusion. This approach to storytelling plays off of our expectations and serves to critique the genre while simultaneously reveling in some of the more enjoyable aspects of a genre's known commonalities. It asks the question, how would these characters and situations play out in the real world without giving them the usual fictional foundations to stand on? Personally, I don't believe that HunterxHunter is a faithful deconstruction of the shonen genre. It deviates and falls short from examining the genre through a real-world lens several times throughout the series. Many characters behave and situations play out in ways that you would expect them to in a typical shonen series. It more successfully attempts to deconstruct what we have come to know as the shonen protagonist trope, but it even does this inadequately. Through a real-world lens, it makes perfect sense for a 12-year-old boy, despite being given amazing and destructive powers, to still behave like a 12-year-old boy. His main attack, Janken, is based on rock, paper, scissors after all. It's a kid's game. He's a kid. When you look at the series this way, it makes perfect sense for him to want to find his father after he abandoned him like any boy his age would. It makes sense for him to still be immature and behave impulsively, and get emotional when confronted with things that any 12-year-old boy would have trouble trying to understand, like the idea that Neferpito can cause so much pain and hurt, yet also heal a little girl's injuries, even though her intentions were far from altruistic. The problem is, Togashi spits in the face of the deconstructive nature of the show, wimps out, and doesn't go all the way with it, by completely eliminating any consequences for Gon's actions. When Gon rashly deviates from the plan and loses his hand to Genthru, there are no consequences because they were on Greed Island and he easily uses a card to get his hand fixed. When Gon's trauma and emotion results in the ass-pull transformation that should have left his body completely destroyed all but killing him, he's resurrected by Killua's magic genie sibling. When Gon is left to deal with the trauma of Kite's death and his guilt surrounding it, Kite is resurrected as a chimera ant through some nebulous, poorly defined net ability that Kite apparently had. Even after he's revived by Alaka and we are told that he can no longer use his net abilities, Jin confirms that he does actually still have his net and simply has to find a way to access it. Time and time again, Gon is safeguarded by plot armor from any kind of real consequences for his actions, making him a shallow attempt at writing a protagonist deconstruction. This problem is further accentuated by the apparent lack of growth with his character, as he is ostensibly unaffected by all his experiences and hardships over the course of the series. My final problem with Gon, and in general my problem with stories and characters designed to be deconstructions, is their myopic nature. Even if you consider Gon to be a successful deconstruction of a shonen protagonist, and if you look at a show that serves as the poster child for deconstruction, Neon Genesis Evangelion, I still ask myself, how successful were they in creating an entertaining piece of media? I understand that this is my subjective opinion, and these properties may not necessarily exist just to serve the purpose of entertainment, but I simply do not find enjoyment in seeing an emotional, reckless kid run fist first into every situation for 148 episodes, nor do I enjoy watching a sad, lonely 14-year-old Shinji Ikari wade through depression and anxiety caused by having the fate of the world dumped on his ill-equipped shoulders, despite my understanding of the real-world accuracy these characters are intended to portray. Now, to go back to the Chimera Ant arc, specifically Gon's transformation. Nen is most likely my favorite power system that I've seen in any anime. Togashi knocked it out of the park with this, and that's because of how he simultaneously meticulously outlined the parameters of Nen while leaving himself enough creative room for variety and experimentation. Characters' powers range from lightning and electricity-based attacks to one girl literally being able to summon a vacuum cleaner with infinite space. This attention to detail is also present when Togashi initially introduces the idea of limitations and vows. When Kurapika, described as a genius prodigy, is explaining his abilities to Gon, he explains that he first had to create his chains, which took hours of training involving touching, drawing, and dreaming of chains before he could effectively conjure his own. In addition to this, to close the gap between himself and the Phantom Troop members, he then unlocks his ability as a specialist when he uses the Scarlet Eyes, allowing him to use all forms of Nen with a certain level of proficiency, something he's only able to do as a member of the Kurta clan. This ability comes with a steep price, as every second spent in this mode causes him to lose an hour of his lifespan. On top of that, he then uses the limitation technique on his chains, greatly increasing their power and making them unbreakable, but vowing to only use those chains on the Phantom Troop members, a vow that, if broken, would result in the loss of his life. In addition to this, when he uses his Nen abilities and the Scarlet Eyes at the same time, the toll it takes on his body and mind leaves him incapacitated for days at a time. All of these conditions and restrictions provide a sense of control and balance that don't make the character feel too overpowered or poorly written. All these detailed limitations and boundaries, however, are thrown out the goddamn window when it comes time for Gon to use the limitation technique. Gon, who's only aware of the existence of this technique after briefly hearing about it from Kurapika, employs it right in the nick of time before Neferpito can kill him and Killua. Despite it being mentioned earlier in the series, this transformation is still a bit of an ass pull. The boundaries of the vow are never really explained outside of a vague, cryptic statement from Gon. He never engages in any training to learn the technique, and again, when all is said and done, he's left mostly unencumbered by any consequences as a result of this thing. An ass-pull transformation right in the nick of time, coming about ostensibly from a surge of emotion in a back-against-the-wall situation, could not be further from a deconstruction, despite the somber atmosphere surrounding it. Oh, he loses an arm, guys. Oh, he's crying. It's real dark. It's real edgy. Yeah, I get it. Come on, guys. As far as the Chimera Ant arc itself, there were some good points, but the most salient point of contention I have is the terrible pacing. The entire arc is 61 episodes long, by far the longest in the series, and it definitely didn't need to be. The main fight between the cast of heroes and the Chimera Ants moves so incredibly slowly, largely because of the unnecessary amount of internal monologuing and narration present throughout the entire fight. A large portion at the start of the palace invasion is in slow motion, making everything feel like it's dragging on even longer. Also, way too much time is dedicated to the B-stories going on between some minor Chimera Ant characters like Bolster, Welfin, and Leol, and others that you don't really care about, which makes these parts of the arc feel like long detours you have to endure to get back to the main story. Now for Meruem, the main villain of this arc, I found his character to be intriguing and his character arc to probably be the most satisfying in the entire series, however it isn't the most original. The concept of a villain who, through his interactions with the opposite side, comes to see that opposition in a different light than they initially did, has certainly been done before. Examples that come to mind include, Mewtwo, Vegeta, Gaara, Creed from FMA Brotherhood, Lord Genome. This kind of antagonist is actually
pretty standard, really.
He starts off as a cruel, ruthless ruler with no regard for any being he deems to be below himself, which to him is everyone, but, specifically humanity. And the way Komugi changes his perceptions of the world as well as his perceptions of himself is both gradual and believable. The relationship is one that I found myself caring deeply for, save for the way it ended. As for the fight between Netero and Meruem, I felt it was a bit anticlimactic. The spectacle was there, being the most visually interesting fight to watch in the arc, but it was lacking in some areas. Much of the dramatic weight behind a fight in anime comes from the opposing ideologies that each combatant represents or stands for, and Netero's presence in the fight felt very interchangeable. And it seems like Togashi recognized this, so he ham-handedly pushes this backstory for him in the middle of the fight about learning to punch fast through prayer and dedication to Nen, which led to the creation of that multi-arm Buddha technique, which ultimately fails to defeat Meruem and fails to make you care about the death of his mostly underdeveloped character. Netero's use of the poor man's rose was surprising and unexpected, however, but the way it killed the rest of the Chimera ants, including Meruem, felt a bit like a Deus Ex Machina, but I didn't exactly mind until it came time for Meruem to see Komugi for the last time. Through Meruem's interactions with Komugi, he comes to question his previously held ideas regarding strength and power, as well as change the way he views humanity as a whole. He doesn't entirely acknowledge the worth of humanity, however, but decides to keep them around in zoos instead of completely annihilating them, adding to the believability of his gradual change and growth as a character. Through the character of Komugi, Meruem begins to see the value in human life, right? Personally, I think it would have been much more emotionally and thematically impactful if he simply said goodbye to her and left to die somewhere else with her just in his thoughts. I understand how Komugi and Meruem dying in each other's embrace tugs on your heartstrings, but having Meruem knowingly kill Komugi by contaminating her with his poison when she would have otherwise lived felt like a contradiction to his new respect for human life that she herself provoked in him. Maybe that one's a bit of a nitpick, but it definitely feels like a wasted opportunity. Despite the negatives that I focused on in this video, I found the series as a whole to be very enjoyable. The world is vibrant, the cast of characters is interesting and diverse, and the concept of Nen is creative and dynamic, and as our understanding of it continues to grow, it remains fresh and unpredictable. I would definitely recommend HunterxHunter to any fan of shonen or anime fan in general. Feel free to tell me how shit my taste is in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.